I'll welcome you to our agenda review for this Thursday's meeting. Today is January the 19th, and our meeting will be on the 21st. This agenda review is being conducted electronically pursuant to Governor Lee's Executive Order 71. And as a part of that, we need to begin our meeting by having the reading of the roll. Mr. Peterson, do you have somebody to read the roll for this gathering that keeps no minutes?
I will be glad to do that, sir. All right. Commissioner Brock.
Here.
Commissioner Hunter.
Here.
Commissioner Murphy.
Here.
Vice Mayor Fowler.
Here.
Mayor Wise.
Here.
All present accounted for.
Thank you. There probably, do we want to go through the agenda by way of things you wish to call out first, or do we want to go down the list and just ask if there are elements that people have questions about?
If you want, we'll take care of your all's questions first. And then if there are other things we want to bring to your attention, we will once we ensure we have your questions addressed.
Okay. I would like to hear a little bit more about 8.1 and the ordinance regarding the shipping containers. I know we heard a presentation about that, and at the time I thought we were a little unclear why we needed to be first to that party, and so I would like to hear from staff why we need to be first to that party.
That was one of mine, Mayor. Also, I'd like a little bit more discussion on the MX1, the rezoning over on Highland and down the corridor there. Just
And that's 8.2.
correct.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Commissioner Hunter, do you have anything?
You took the two that I was interested in, and then also just had a question about the police units that are going to be auctioned off.
You looking for a car for one of your kids, or?
Yeah,
Okay.
trying to get ahead of the game.
Okay.
So, Mayor, I did have another one. That's
Oh,
the
I'm
privilege-
sorry.
Yeah, the privilege tax. I think we need a
Okay,
full discussion on that.
sure. Mhm.
And
That's-
perhaps the residency thing, since that's all new.
Okay, so that's
11.1.
11.1 and then 11.2.
Correct. I'll be quiet now.
And
Sorry.
John's was 7.11. I think it's the Army surplus Hummer that John's wanting to take from the police there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're supposed to get some good snows this spring.
All right. Commissioner Murphy, do you have anything that you'd like to see addressed in more depth?
The same concern that Commissioner Brock had concerning the tax. Just unpack that a little bit. And then also 5.1, the beer license for Johnson City Brewing Company. I was reading in the attachments that they weren't paying what their beer tax or whatnot for a period of time, but got caught up. Just wanted to unpack that story a little bit.
Okay. So, Vice Mayor?
I think that's all I had. I did want to make one comment about the Public Works update. They had the different things and how far along they were percentage wise on completion, and I'd like to know how approximately 42.573% of Southside Elementaries is done. That sounds like a pretty good approximation. We don't have to talk about that. I'm done.
Well, they rounded to get to that number. So, all right, Mr. Peterson, I think you've heard from all of us. Where do you want to start?
The number on Southside School, Vice Mayor, my best guess would be they took the contract amount and divided it by the amount of the pay request to date. And that gave you the percentage of project completion, would be my best educated guess.
That's an approximation that looks pretty good to me. All right.
And just for the benefit of the commission, Southside to date, knock on wood, is probably running a little bit ahead. They've had good weather. They got dried in. They did get hit with COVID, so they just recently have lost a couple of weeks. The Woodland project, the bids are in. They're reviewing those. That'll be ready to go really quick. The Lake Ridge project will be ready to go out to bid here probably in the next 6 weeks or so, probably early March. The Indian Trail project is running a little ahead of schedule right now. One thing that's going to be helpful with Indian Trail is only 75% of the students have chosen to go to class, or I guess another way to say that would be 25% of them have chosen to remote learn. So that's going to give them some flexibility to move students around so they can go in and renovate science labs while the building is still in use by the students. So that should end up in real good shape from a time perspective. So things are good on school projects right now. JC Brewing, Sonny, you want to give them a quick overview on JC Brewing, please, ma'am? You're on mute.
I apologize. I realize that. JC Brewing has been expanding their business to third the location that's an off-premise, in the process of reviewing that application and discussing with the applicant on getting everything prepared. It was realized that there had never been an application for their manufacturing location. I think it's approximately 2014 or 2015 whenever they established their manufacturing location, as well as their downtown location. For whatever reason, there was perhaps lack of communication at the time that properly informed, or that it properly was registered, that a separate application is required for each location, meaning everything has to be inspected and approved with each address that's unique for either an operation or a license. That's been remedied at this time without the necessity of closing the manufacturing operation until such time as it can be properly licensed. With each license that's issued, there's an annual privilege tax that is due of $100, which means that that's never been paid. To date, there's not been a request for that to be back paid by the applicant, but we are bringing them into compliance at this point.
Any other questions, Commissioner Murphy?
No, sir.
Thank you, Sonny. Police vehicles, the former cruisers, as you can see, are all over 100,000 miles, some of them 15, 16 years old. The newer ones are, I guess, 12 years old. The military surplus stuff that we have are some old Humvees. Those did not come with armament. They did not come with armor plating. Those were at one time roadworthy. They are low mileage. They don't get used much. Those are 24-volt electrical systems, which are unique. These vehicles are expensive to get parts for, and no more use than we have for them. We typically end up having to buy new batteries for them every year, which is really expensive. Since we have transitioned to a front-wheel drive automobile and have just this year been forced to transition into a four-wheel or an all-wheel drive SUV, as that's the only type vehicle that's available now for police work, There's really no need for us to keep these. We have had these vehicles long enough that the military has authorized us to sell them. So any other questions there, Commissioner, on the vehicles?
Thanks. That's great info. I'm assuming, are we replacing all of these, or have they already been replaced in last year's budget? As far as the cruisers and whatnot.
The cruisers have been replaced. These have all been out of service probably more than a year.
Okay.
The Humvees, they were in a parade occasionally, or if it really got nasty and snowed, we'd get them out just to save wear and tear on vehicles. But typically those things are probably driven less than 150 miles a year.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Pete, do y'all ever consider any other departments might be able to use some of these unique vehicles like Parks and Rec or Public Works to go into the back country?
The Humvees are more expensive to operate than you can justify keeping them. They're extremely wide. They're a handful to drive on the road. Like I say, they're older vehicles. They're hard to get parts for.
Okay.
It's really cheaper on us to buy a four-wheel recreational vehicle or something like that. They're cheaper. They're easier to maintain. You can get parts for them. Those types of things. But if anybody needs one, we've got a couple for sale. We'd be glad to auction them off. Govdeals.com. Okay, Preston, shipping containers, please, sir.
Yes, sir. This text amendment came to you back in November, and it was pulled from the agenda. There were a number of concerns surrounding introduction of these into residential areas. Since then, the city manager and I discussed it briefly back in November, and then we just tabled it through the holidays. Since then, we have rediscussed and are putting it back on the agenda minus the residential component. And so what you have in front of you is a text amendment that would, if adopted, allow shipping containers by definition, and that's been provided, to be used as accessory structures in non-residential areas, and then also as mini warehouse and self-storage. The two zones where they would be permitted for mini warehousing and self-storage would be in the B4 and B5, and then the light industrial. Keep in mind that in the commercial, in the B4 or the B5, they're not by right uses. Mini storage or mini warehousing is not a by right use. It would require a special exception in front of the BZA. However, in the light industrial, they would be considered a by right use. So again, removing any and all conversation about these in residential areas, only considering in the non-red commercial and industrial.
So Preston, I have two questions. One is I'd like for you to go a little bit more in depth about grade A, B, and C, and then the requirements depending on the grade of the container. But also if you could talk about, is there any place along State of Franklin where we have a design overlay where these would be allowed?
It would, I'd have to pull up the map, and I can have that for you for Thursday, so that I'm not fumbling to pull up GIS right here on the agenda review. But I'll be glad to have that for you, and I'll verify what areas are zone B4 that are essentially undeveloped and would allow for mini warehousing. Keep in mind, mini warehousing and self-storage is already a permitted use in those zones with a special exception. This is basically just allowing that type of use with this different building material. There are standards in place, such as buffering standards. The units have to be turned perpendicular to the street. They can't run broadside to the street. So there are standards in place that the BZA would have to check off. But I'll be glad to have that map ready for you.
Yeah, my real question is in the design overlay on the state of Franklin, we took extra, we made extra requirements of all those buildings being built there to be a certain percentage of brick and stone and all that kind of stuff, that these unique finishes.
And restricted storage. I mean, they
Very
were
much so.
expressly prohibited in the DO.
So the grade A says you don't have to do anything to it. You can just bring that in. So if one of the out parcels there in front of the Food City, could they bring in a storage container, grade A, that's orange, and plop down beside their building for storage?
I will go, well, first of all, allow me to go in and verify the design overlay requirements, because if those, we did not propose any changes from a use perspective for any overlays. So any design overlays, any corridor overlays that limit storage, outdoor storage, or any kind of warehousing or storage that is already in place, we did not propose any changes to that, but I will make sure that there's no conflict there. If it's not within the design overlay or not within a corridor overlay, then theoretically, yes, it would be, one would be able to use one of these units as an accessory structure in a non-residential zone that is not in an overlay.
Well, we have some down on the state of Franklin right before you get to Founders Park, you know, and they have storage containers that we've all complained about, and they finally did go in and paint them, which make it look a little bit better.
Right.
But I guess where I'm coming in on this is where the value in terms of curb appeal for our city, where the value of these storage containers really fall. And I don't know. I just have a lot of concerns about us opening this up, that we can plop they're not storage containers, they are shipping containers, and that's what they were designed and built for. That, you know, why we would go this route. But I'm not totally sold yet, but
Sure.
That doesn't mean I can't be sold. But I still have a lot of questions, and these are unique areas that, you know, that are the gateways to our city. And so I just don't know how it applies. I can't tell from what I have right now where exactly they'd be allowed and where they wouldn't. And then a grade A can come in just, and it's the container in and of itself without any wraps or design elements added to it.
And if that's something that the commission would want to consider, that if these were to be introduced at all as accessory structures for, you know, for the purposes of storage of whatever any non-residential use has in the rear yard, that those would have to have a wrap, and that's something, you know, that we could easily change on the language, that it would have to be clad or wrapped in some way, regardless of the grade. The gradation really comes into play more strongly with the mini warehousing when it's used, when they're constructed, when you have multiple units and they're constructed for mini warehousing purposes. But yes, happy to have that ready for you on Thursday.
And could you be ready to deal with a definitions question? I guess, you know, I'm thinking about like those pods, or, you know, that are shipping containers, but they're vastly smaller than the big shipping containers you see on trains. If a business came to town, like a U-Haul type business, when do you stop being self-storage, and when do you, so I've got a parking lot full of these pods, and they're only here until the people who have the pods request me to bring the pod out to their house so they can unload it or something like that. How long can a pod sit in my lot and I still not be a self-storage place? Do you follow my question?
I think I do. We have in our, oh, forgive me. In our,
I saw Charlie's hands. He did nothing there.
that was our permitting coordinator.
Okay.
I will open the item and verify, but one of the things that we did was make sure in our definitions to clearly define what one of these Connex shipping containers are, and that the more temporary types, the pods, U-Haul makes a brand, a couple of other of these temporary pods are not to be misconstrued or fall under the definition of a Connex box. But I will make sure that that is clarified as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Do anyone else any other commissioners have questions of Preston on that particular topic? Peter, you ready to move on to the next item?
I would like to make one further clarification. A non-residential accessory structure has to go in the rear yard. And according to this proposed ordinance, the container shall not be placed adjacent to residential districts or development. So the Food City question, for example, if they had one of these, it would have to go to the rear of the building, and the rear of the building is adjacent to a residential area. So those would not be allowed in that particular example.
I'm going to take that out.
And I don't remember, you all changed the definitions of yard areas in terms of side yard or rear yard and side yard, and where accessory structures could go and all that type of thing. And I don't remember the details of that. So when you get your explanation together, Preston, if you would resurrect that information and include it as a part of your explanation, please, sir.
Happy to.
Yeah, I think the bigger question is, would they be allowed in a design overlay area? And what I really referred to were the out parcels that, sit on the front of the building. As long as they put the container behind it, it's still going to be visible from inside the development. So
I will make sure on that, because again, there was no proposal to modify any corridor or design overlays. What I want to make sure of is that any of the language we are modifying doesn't conflict with that. So.
Okay, you want to explain the MX1 rezoning, please, sir, Preston?
Yes, sir. This is a city-initiated rezoning, so we are the applicant. There is no development proposed as part of this. This is I would call it a mid-scale or large-scale rezoning, only because it just doesn't involve one single piece of property, but involves a number of properties along the West Watauga corridor there between State of Franklin and Lamont Street. So as you're going up the hill past University Edge Apartments, there on West Watauga, the proposal is to convert that zoning to mixed use neighborhood, small scale mixed use. And then it jumps all the way over the block there of Highland and Lamont to the properties that now front on our Founders Park parking lot, overlooking Founders Park, overlooking Model Mill, State of Franklin. Those properties, the proposal is that those convert to neighborhood mixed use as well. We held because of the size and scale of this, we wanted to make sure and really do some as much robust public engagement as we could during the middle of a pandemic. But last October 24th, as a matter of fact, on a Saturday morning, we rented a tent, a large tent, and had it erected in the parking lot there at Founders Park, and invited residents and property owners. And that's an important distinction, just because I remember that was a conversation we had Commissioner Brock during the rezoning request by Brian Winston about whether or not we're getting notices out to owners and residents. And so we mailed postcards to owners and residents in that entire study area, and had maps and coffee and donuts and masked up and all that kind of stuff to come out October 24th and do a public engagement session, walk through Q&A, and talk about the city's zoning study. Had a pretty decent turnout. You know, it wasn't great. There was a chance of rain and plus the pandemic, but had a fairly decent turnout. Folks walked down to the tent and grabbed a cup of coffee and talked with us about what the MX1 means and why we were moving forward with this. So back to the genesis, when this really came about was after the most recent rezoning that the city commission considered there on the last two lots on Highland, 202 and 204 Highland. If you recall, the very last one went to MX1, and then the one right on the inside stayed residential, which is the one that Habitat is hoping to purchase and build another home there. And so what we realized is that you essentially, with the new parking lot and Founders Park and all that, you have kind of a newfound frontage overlooking those areas. And we've received a number of phone calls, folks kicking tires about possibly doing small scale mixed use and things like that in that area. For example, you may remember that Michael Manzi recently purchased one of the surplus lots that the city has there along North Commerce. And so that was part of that conversation. And so then as we were digging into that, we received a phone call from David Lefemin, who's a realtor representing the property owner on the opposite end of the block, the corner of Highland and Watauga, and asked about could that home be potentially converted to a mixed use zoning. So that's what developed this zoning study into the scale that it is today. So we ran that through the Planning Commission Legislative Committee, asked for their blessing on doing the public engagement piece. Legislative Committee gave us their blessing, went out and did the public engagement on that Saturday morning from 9 to 12, brought it back to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission blessed it. And so that's why it is in front of you today.
Preston, would you give us a recap of what the neighborhood input was?
Yes, ma'am. Happily, the bulk of the neighborhood impact was positive. Property owners in the area, as well as non-owning residents, seem to be interested in the idea or the concept of neighborhood scale or small scale mixed use. You may have read in the paper right around Christmas or New Year's, there was an editorial from a resident that lives in the area, and she was, or an opinion piece that was concerned about gentrification and, what does this do to folks who have been residing in this area for some time. So we understand that concern is out there, but in large part, we received nothing but positive support.
Preston, why don't you explain what the MX zoning allows and this parts of this neighborhood, that quarter along Watauga and probably those properties on Commerce were purposefully downzoned from medium density residential to low density residential, and why it is advantageous to rezone that to MX, which will allow commercial activity in a residential zone.
You're talking about doing that explanation on Thursday at the public meeting or now?
I can do it both. I'm happy
You only need to hear it once.
Okay.
I mean, that might be good to be a part of the presentation on Thursday, just because we know more citizenry takes advantage of the Thursday night just based on the YouTube counts. And so I think it would be helpful if we're going to go into more depth, that more people get the opportunity to hear it.
Sure.
And I just want to keep an eye on the clock because we're right at the halfway point. And so I don't want to get to the end and have left other stuff unaddressed.
Sure. And I appreciate the city manager's comments because there's a little bit of I'm actually glad he brought that up because I don't want there to be confusion between those efforts to downzone and what this is trying to do. This is not trying to undo that. And so I'm glad he brought that up because I need to provide that clarification on Thursday.
Thank you.
I think the big question that I have, because we've just dealt with another one over to rezone for MX1 across from locomotion, that he's going to want to put a bar and a pump track in between two houses. And so what we're talking about here is changing the nature of an area that's been that way for a long, long time and adding commercial development, in between houses or next door to houses. And so that's the kind of part I just need to make sure that it's the right move to make. Now, granted, this is a very desirable area now for development. Up behind Commerce Street there and on Wilson and in that particular area as well. I mean, there's lots of other space that can be redeveloped too. Hope we're trying to guide some people up in that direction as well. But that's kind of the hurdle I have to get over. Is this what we want to do, is to go into a well-established residential area and introduce commercial? I mean, right up and down Watauga and Unaka, it's throughout there. So when that started, I don't know if these conversations went on and people, didn't like that, but it's certainly well established now. And I guess it works fine, but you've got a business wedged in between two houses, two residentials. So for me personally, I just need to kind of get over the hump to say that's a good thing.
Sure, understood.
And Preston, it might be helpful on that point. In this particular footprint, there were retail and commercial businesses, little neighborhood. I think there was a TV repair, or I think there was a Zenith dealer there on Wilson, or I don't remember exactly now. I have a mental picture of it, but there are currently some buildings that are clearly built to be retail or commercial of a neighborhood nature that right now probably wouldn't be conforming because they're not zoned to be used that way, though they're built to, I mean, they would make a lousy house. So anyway, let's plan to talk about that a little further on Thursday. Does anybody have questions for Preston on the MX1 stuff? Pete, what's next on the list you've got?
Privilege tax discussion. Sonny, you want to give them the background on what's before them, please, ma'am?
The way that this has been placed on the agenda for your review and consideration is for discussion. There is proposed language that we've been working on to address the requests and the concerns that have been brought before us. How would you like this discussion to go? I can read to you the proposed language and open that up for discussion. Would that be a preferred method to approach this?
I had sent in a number of questions, Pete, a couple of weeks ago on this. So I don't know if it's worthwhile that they were more fundamental from a macro thing. Should we adjust the privilege tax? And those were some of the things that I really needed answers to get to a point where I felt like I could make an informed decision.
Sonny, have you got that email that answered that?
Yes, I do. I've got the questions as well as what the individual responses were. The first question was regarding a question about the loss of city revenue. With if you eliminate the tax, you'd lose approximately $50,000 a year, and that would obviously move forward every year. As we previously discussed, there is some concern that if we do reduce the tax, we might not be able to restore that to its current level based on the controlling statute, the state statute that gives the municipality the authority to issue this tax. So the proposal that we've worked on during a pandemic period would reduce those taxes to be collected by 50%. That would result in approximately a $25,000 loss based on last year's numbers. Obviously, if you have more businesses that become eligible for this tax, that number would proportionally increase. But again, it's drafted just for a pandemic, what the proposed language would be for your consideration. The second question is, if we can't restore to its original level later, what would be the impact? Again, that would be approximately $25,000 each year, growing proportionally if there was an increase of businesses eligible. The next, if we lower the occupancy tax for restaurants and bars, do we expect other businesses might come forward making the case their business has also been harmed by COVID and request other kinds of tax decreases? I do believe that would be a reasonable thing to anticipate. There's been an impact across the board for different businesses, including retail. There's been other impacts to different businesses in different retail sectors, different business sectors. I think that would be something that would be anticipated if there was a reduction in one tax to be collected by the city for one certain type of business. It could be reasonably anticipated that other businesses would also.
Let me ask a question on that front. This tax is calculated on occupancy, plain and simple. If you have 100 seats, you pay one thing. If you have 200 seats, you pay another, correct?
For part C of the ordinance.
Correct.
There's an A and a B as well.
Okay, but I think what we were talking about was the part that I was raising issue with is if we've been telling a business that because they say they have 125 seats, their tax is X, and every year they pay X, and then all of a sudden along comes a pandemic and the city says to them, oh, we're going to need you to multiply X by 0.5. It needs to be half of X. But we still want you to pay taxes like you're at X. Is there another tax that is calculated based on occupancy this way? I mean, we collect tax on retail, yes, but it's based on sales. So if they sell 100 of something, we collect more than if they sold 50. Is there another tax fee privilege that is tied to occupancy where we might be asking people to put a lid on it and yet still expecting them to pay taxes like we hadn't?
I'm unaware of any other taxes that are purely based on occupancy. However, this tax also, we don't ask for occupancy for private clubs or for hotels, motels. The restaurants
Correct.
are proportional, I guess, as a matter of equity for the size of them, since retail would change and vary.
Right. And I think that's the part that was the question in my mind from the very beginning. How do we hold the fee at the same number, even though if they're doing what we are pleading with them to do, cut their occupancy in half, it seems counterintuitive to turn around and slap them upside the head and say, oh, well, yeah, we've asked you to cut your occupancy in half, but we expect you to keep paying us like you haven't. And so if there's not another example, and that's why this is not some sort of helping them out when it's times are tough. This is just a fairness argument. If occupancy is less because they're complying with our public health message, we ought to factor that in assessing a fee based purely on occupancy.
We also haven't done any studies to the impact of retail, though. When they've been asked to reduce capacity by 50%, we haven't studied to see their revenue losses and what impact that's had on them.
True, but we would feel those losses because our loss is tied proportionally to their sales. So nothing about the occupancy. I mean, we don't go to the mall and say, well, because 100 people are going to come here today, you're going to pay 20% of the store that has 500 people. Truth of the matter is, we don't care. As long as people are there shopping, then they're going to pay the fee.
Correct. We haven't done any type of base study even for the restaurants to determine if occupancy levels or curbside or any of the other accommodations by the state have impacted their revenues.
Well, this isn't about their revenues. This is about the way you calculate the fee is based on the number of chairs they have. And we're telling them to have 50% fewer chairs.
As a baseline, yes. Then that's
well, no, that's the basis. That's the basis of the fee.
for Part C, and that's why we
Correct.
proposed the language as a 50%
Mm.
overall, since it would also, we don't ask for seating for private clubs and for hotel motels that are taxed the same tax. Which
Correct.
is why we proposed it this way.
Which in those particular cases, since their occupancy never mattered,
Mhm.
it doesn't matter now. But if you're the business with 100 seats who now is having to live with 50 to come around annually and pay the privilege tax like you still have 100, I mean, can we at least acknowledge why to a small business person that just seems like an absurd notion? You, the city, have asked me to cut my occupancy in half, but you want me to pay you a tax based on that I didn't?
I can't make that acknowledgement because I don't know what their seating capacity continues to be. Some restaurants have had the ability to expand their seating during this time period.
Pete, what are your, let me ask what Pete's thoughts are on that.
Well, the mayor's, it makes a valid point in terms of the seating, the request for the seating reduction. Some people abided by that, some didn't. It was a request, unenforceable. We don't know who did and who didn't, other than windshield surveys up and down the road. You know, at the end of the day, I think it's all about making a profit. And there were concessions made to certain businesses by the state and by local government for to-go alcohol, for outdoor dining, and for other things for different businesses. You know, I think it would be prudent to go back and look at their sales tax reporting for the year and compare that to historical data and see if there is an impact, measurable impact there as a result of going through the pandemic the past year. And, you know, then you've got some real justification. I think that's unarguable because you can see that their sales tax reporting has been impacted by something. Pretty much I think it would be a safe assumption to say it's the pandemic. But you may have some of those folks that actually sold more goods, even though there was a request for less seating in those establishments. You know, I think you can't ignore the fact that you may have other businesses that come forward and say, okay, if you're going to do this, you need to recognize that my business was impacted too, and I'd like to have some sort of help as well.
Well, and let's be clear, my motivation in raising this question was not that their business was impacted. My motivation is we assess a fee based on occupancy. And we have asked them to cut their occupancy by 50%. So it seems reasonable that, you know, if the basis of the fee is occupancy and we've asked them to cut their occupancy, how do we keep the fee the same and not at least recognize a temporary adjustment to reflect compliance? I mean, in the case, the restaurateurs that are most actively asking for this are the ones that have been complying with our requests.
So let's back up to, first of all, it's the state that made the request for the reduction in occupancy. Is that a correct statement, Pete?
Yes, ma'am.
And is there an occupancy or privilege tax throughout the state?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So for us as an individual city to affect the privilege tax here, when it's the state who initiated this and they're not doing anything statewide, that would have some concerns for me.
Do other municipalities in the state have a local option pegged to this occupancy?
Yes.
Who?
We know that Bristol and Kingsport have done nothing along these lines.
Do they have an occupancy?
I'm sorry, other than that, I don't know of any other municipalities we've checked with.
Let's be clear what question you're answering, though. Bristol and Kingsport haven't made concessions of this nature, but do Bristol and Kingsport have a local privilege tax tied to occupancy?
That is my understanding, yes.
That they do or they don't?
They do.
Okay.
It's my understanding as well, Mayor, that they follow the same schedule that was set forth by the state, the same that we follow.
Okay. Can we get some of that information? I mean, this is something that's not going away. I think it's just a matter of fairness. If we're going to assess a fee based on occupancy, and then we, the state or the city, are going to change occupancy numbers, it's a little bit, it stretches the imagination. It just seems absurd to continue to assess on a higher number. So, I mean, if there's more information you want us to have, start putting it together. But right now we're just lobbing questions across the net. And I think we need to have some facts on the table.
And Mayor, I might add that the Tennessee Pledge, the Economic Recovery Group and the Tennessee Pledge, the guidelines that they set forth were to have at least 6 feet spacing in restaurants and reduce 50% capacity in retail. So it was some restaurants actually increased their seating during the pandemic, but just utilized more of their footprint.
Who did that?
It's my understanding that at least one business that we have been personally made aware of that was not required to pay this privilege tax last year due to, I believe the seating capacity was 64 last year, reported an increased seating up to 80 seats, which then triggered eligibility for the local tax. So there was an increase of seating, which was, that number's reported to the state and then given back.
And there was no change in their footprint to see a 35% increase in their occupancy? Something that to me sounds like there's something else. There's more behind that number.
Those are self-reported. So there was no increase regarding survey or property lines to the city. So if they did increase, it wasn't reported, but the number to the state was reported.
Maybe they bought skinnier chairs.
And that could have been the case.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the configuration difference was, but, and we actually, there was another restaurant that we worked with here locally that expanded to an outdoor seating area, which actually increased the number of seats they had available as well. Because what they did is they expanded into part of their parking lot. So we have had other businesses that have expanded seating. Now, whether that can continue through the winter months, I don't know. But I know there have been others that have utilized portions of their parking lots because we've worked with them regarding what spots can be consumed and which ones cannot.
Okay. Are there other commissioners with questions?
I'm good.
Commissioner Murphy?
I'm fine.
All right.
Sonny, while you're up, would you want to give them the details on the request to adopt a resolution in support of the Drug Dealer Liability Act lawsuit, please, ma'am?
Yes, sir. There, and I've provided to each of you individually the background information regarding the litigation that's currently pending. There's a case that's filed in Sullivan County in state court that portions of that case have gone up through appeal. The Tennessee Supreme Court, before Christmas, it was December 18th, issued an opinion that the district attorney generals do not have the statutory authority to maintain an action in their own capacity. The background to this case, this is an opioid case that's been filed on behalf of Baby Doe as well as the attorney generals, or sorry, the district attorney generals. The ruling by the Tennessee Supreme Court has triggered a response by a Nashville law firm that represents the DAs and Baby Doe. without being part of their legal strategy. It's our belief that the reason that the law firm is now reaching out to the local counties and cities that are covered by these DAs is an effort to keep that portion of the lawsuit alive. Our Attorney General is Ken Baldwin, and we have received communication from his office with a retainer and a resolution. The resolution would be for the approval of entry into the retainer agreement. The liability that potentially could be opened up on the part of the city in entering into a lawsuit of this magnitude as a named party, in my opinion, outweighs the benefit. The city of Johnson City is not a necessary or indispensable party to the lawsuit. Those are two, there's actual legal threshold for the definition of those parties. The city of Johnson City is encompassed obviously within the borders for the county of Washington County. Washington County has passed the resolution and entered into the retainer agreement with the law firm. Therefore, any cause of action that would occur within the borders for the county obviously would encompass Johnson City. So it's part of my obligations to the city manager, to the mayor, to the commissioners is to give advice on these legal matters that might open up the city to additional litigation that would not be advisable in my assessment of this case and the research, as well as correspondence with Attorney Eric Herron. Also had a conference call with Mike Billingsley and Bart Ratliff and Kingsport regarding their reaction to this.
What are they doing?
Kingsport is waiting to see what we do. However, we shared the same concerns. At this point, they have not received this documentation from their attorney general yet. It's in the pipeline. There's going to be a united front from each of these areas. But again, the county is, if you look at the complaint's 99 pages long, and it references the county, and each cause of action for each one of those attorney generals is for its county. Therefore, there's nothing that is specific to Johnson City. We have communicated, corresponded, worked with the attorneys out of Nashville throughout their course of pursuing this action. We have had city employees that have been deposed. I have sat with them through their depositions. We have provided a little over 4,000 emails. So we are working with them on document production, witnesses, deposition discovery. Those are things that obviously I would recommend we continue to cooperate with, but there's not a reason to be a named party to the suit.
Now, this isn't on our agenda for Thursday, is it, Pete?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Okay, under
7.1.
7. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
I was looking at other business.
And part of the concern, if you move beyond the fact that the city is not a necessary or indispensable party to this action and would in no way hamper the pursuit of the generals, looking at the liability portion, there are very substantial legal fees. It's estimated they're approximately $1 million at this point. If in the event, as a plaintiff, we would not prevail in this action, there are discretionary costs that could be taxed. And those discretionary costs, whenever we know that we're looking at approximately $7 million, up to 7 figures in legal fees, that's a risk that I don't want to tax the city with as well. Those would be taxed to opposing party, likely. early in the discussion with the law firm in Nashville, as we worked with them whenever the action was being pursued solely in the names of Baby Doe and the generals in their official capacity, we discussed what in the event that there was an award or settlement or a judgment in favor of the plaintiffs in this action, what would that look like on behalf of the city? Again, there are multiple counties in this, and there are multiple cities, because each one of the DAs represents larger jurisdictions. There's no say on how this is going to be divided, other than among the three generals, and on behalf of them, their respective areas. But there's also there's nothing real clear defined about how the actual costs are going to be taxed, how those are going to be divvied up. If there's an award, how is that going to be divided? Early in the conversation, whenever it would solely be in their names, they stated that any award that was received, that was allocated to the governmental entities and the municipalities, would be used for programming, rehab clinics, things that were directed to drug recovery. If Washington County remains the named entity on behalf of the city, the same benefit would be received by the city. If there's drug clinics, programming, rehab facilities, those would still remain accessible to our city residents.
Pete, do we have anything else on our agenda review list for question this at this review?
Yes. The last thing.
We have 3 minutes left in our hour, so just want to remind everybody.
We're recommending a change in the residency policy. This is before you because the city commission has approved this policy in the past. Currently, there are several employees, positions, I should say, that are required residency within the city limits. Those include the manager, the assistant managers, finance director, fire chief, planning director, police chief, public works director, water sewer director. What we are recommending is a policy that would require the city manager to live within the city, the corporate limits, or Washington County. And it would require a deputy city manager or assistant city manager who is hired must live in the city or within the 5 contiguous counties of Washington County, and any current city employee that was promoted into one of those 2 positions must live within the city or within the 5 contiguous counties. The rest of those positions would no longer have a residency requirement. This has zero benefit to anybody in position today or currently being, and there's nobody being considered for promotion today. So this has nothing to do with current staff. This is being proposed to you to help you and future administration fill positions. This is all about recruitment and retention. Why 5 contiguous counties? We have a number of people that are currently employed for us that live within Washington County, but beyond the corporate limits. Phil Penzola is a classic example. We have a number of employees who live in Carter, Unicoi, and Greene County. When you go to fill positions in the future, you're going to have existing local government employees employed by other local governments within those 5 contiguous counties that are very viable potential candidates for a vacancy within our organization somewhere. I think it is to the organization's benefit to not exclude those people over a residency requirement. We have several cases to where we've talked to employees about coming to work for us. And when the residency requirement comes up, they're no longer interested because they live 20 or 30-minute drive from here. They don't want to sell a house and have to buy another house within the city limits of Johnson City. So I think it's going to help the organization in the long run in terms of recruitment and retention of quality employees. Now, well, in light of time, I'll be glad to answer any questions you've got.
Pete, I think for Thursday, my only request, I guess, would be to see if we could get some comparison data of other like-sized or growing cities, and whether or not they have residency requirements, and if so, what they look like.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I mean, years and years ago, this was pretty much standard operating procedures. Where are the trends going? We're much more mobile now. And so maybe kind of building the case about the pros and cons of having a residency requirement for Thursday night.
Yeah, I like that. Thanks, Commissioner. All right.
Anything else?
Pete, should we pull the 7.1.10, the litigation question, out of the consent agenda? That seems like a pretty big item to have in the consent agenda.
We can do that. Yes.
I mean, but what was the thinking in putting it in the consent agenda?
To be honest with you, I just let the ladies put the agenda together. I don't think there was any reason, to be honest.
I mean, it just seems like a much bigger question than like surplus police cars.
Yes, sir.
I mean, what are the rest of the commissioners' thoughts on that?
That seems reasonable.
Okay. All right. If there's nothing, do you have anything further, Mr. Peterson?
No, sir.
All right. Commission? Bob and Charlie, nice seeing you. I don't even think you said anything, except, we did see that you didn't call anybody. So,
happy to say that. Yes.
All right. Well, very good. Thank you all, and we'll see you day after tomorrow.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.